Hi everyone, my name is Laura McIntyre, Content Marketing Manager here at Unify Labs. On behalf of the entire Unify team, thank you for joining us today. We are very excited to have you. For this episode of Industry Insights, we are going to discuss the trending topic of integrated project delivery. As some of you know, IPD is a model for delivering construction projects using a single contract for design and construction with a shared risk and reward model, guaranteed cost, and waivers of liability. We've invited some very special panelists working on the University of Washington Population Health Project using the IPD model, including Lowry Pugh, the former VDC manager at Lease Crutcher Lewis, Amber Young, electrical PE at AEI, and Corey Clark, CAD BIM team manager at Vecca Electric. We will learn about their technology workflows for better or for worse, and what to expect when a design and construction team share a single model in a cloud environment using a BIM stack of Revit and BIM 360. We also have Unify's very own BIM specialist, Jay Merlon, to lead the conversation today. Jay has over 13 years of experience in the industry, was a national BIM lead at AEI, and is the founder of the Dynamo user group in Seattle that currently has nearly 200 members. Prior to joining our team at Unify, Jay was a member of the team working on the University of Washington Population Health Project using the IPD model structure. Before handing the floor over to Jay, I want to highlight that the purpose of today's presentation is to provide unbiased insight into how IPD works in practice so you can form an opinion for yourself. I highly encourage you to take advantage of the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation to ask any questions you may have or to write a comment you'd like to share with the group. If you are currently viewing the presentation in full screen mode, please hover over the bottom of your screen and a toolbar will pop up for you to select the Q&A. At the end of the presentation, we will get to these questions, but I welcome you to ask them throughout as they come to mind. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand the floor over to our host to get things started. Jay, take it away.
Oh, thanks, Laura. So as Laura mentioned, I personally have some history with this project. I was involved during the early phases of schematic design as the model manager. And plus I've worked really closely with Lowry and Amber over the years because I've spent time as an employee at both Lewis and AEI. And interestingly enough, Corey was even my counterpart on another UW project where we were model managers. We didn't communicate very much, and maybe that's a testament to the more traditional project delivery methods, at least in terms of BIM. So again, thanks for all your time, and it's great to have you guys on the line. So I've invited you all for the discussion about IPD workflows surrounding technology to help us learn how the team at UW, the Pop Health team, has been proceeding with not only working in a cloud environment, but also sharing a single model. So me being on the BIM management side, I find that very fascinating to see that a design team and a construction team is working in a single model. And I think that's a fairly new approach in our industry. So today we've got the team handling the electrical scope, and as well as Lowry, who is on the general contractor side of the project, or who was formerly on the general contractor side of the project. So let's just go ahead and kick things off here. I remember being at AEI, again, from the early stages of the project, and even just seeing the BIM Execution Plan that Lowry and his team at Lease Crutcher Lewis had put together. So I'm just curious about how the interviewing process was like, because I realized that you were hiring a team of two different firms, and what were some of those technical skills that you were looking for? So this question, I guess, is more for Lowry.
Yeah, so first of all, the team of AEI and Vecca really did a good job showing themselves in the interview. When we started, like I said, with first going to get the job with UW, our design team partners, Miller Hole, and I worked really closely to kind of figure out, our goal essentially was, let's be boundless as possible. Let's try and fix the things that we don't like about working in the VDC BIM environment, and kind of things I think have a tendency to regress to kind of the norms. And so we, at that time, in our pitch, and then really when we went out to subcontractors and looking for partners, that was our attitude, and that was our mantra. At the time, the BIM RFP really more so gave a vision or the parts of a vision, and we were looking really to see who the team members could be that could come in and really understood kind of, even with as vague description as we had, could really help us contribute and fill in some of those unknowns. And so, first of all, you have to be able to do it, you have to have a strong expertise. And Amber, like I said, she really stood out in that team in displaying her knowledge of her scope. And then furthermore, it was really clear to distinguish between the subcontractor design teams we had at the time about who really understood what we were trying to accomplish. And it was a lofty goal. We set out from the start to say that we wanted to build a single source of truth model. We didn't want to duplicate anything at all, if at all possible, in every scope. And so I think that it's very apparent when you have criteria which requires the team to meet it by, having an understanding of really the process of construction. Really, okay, it's not just me doing my thing and throwing it over the fence, but having a broader knowledge, I think, of how all the pieces come together. Then they're more apt and able to answer kind of that question. And so, like I said, Corey and Amber really kind of hit the nail on the head in the interview process in terms of, saying, hey, we understand what you guys are trying to go after here. We're all about it. We want to do the same thing. We want to cross those same hurdles. And so, and they're willing to be a team member, which was what we were looking for. Especially as a GC, we said, hey, we don't have this whole thing baked. We don't have this idea, but we want partners that can come in and help us establish this, and we're all going to take accountability for it.
Oh, that sounds great. Very progressive, I would say. So that's awesome. So for Amber and Corey, you guys have worked together on past projects. Is that correct?
Yeah, we worked together on the University of Life Science building prior to this population health facility.
And so, so this must have been an interesting interview. Were you guys both involved in the interview during the interview with the owner and the GC?
Yeah, we were both in the room when we did the interview with the owner, the GC, and the architect.
That's awesome. And what stage, so for you guys, Amber and Corey, what stage are you guys at right now in the project?
It's not really following typical stages. They're digging in the dirt right now. Corey's working on putting in the underground conduits, and we're still developing the TI permit documents. So it's kind of following a construction schedule, and then we're just supporting the schedule to make sure everything's done in time.
That's interesting. So the typical phases are, the lines have been somewhat blurred, it sounds like, so it's not following the typical DD, CD, CA process.
Correct. It's kind of been blurred just because the speed of the schedule and the environment we're working in with sharing the model.
Okay. And Corey, are you on site right now? Are you on mute, Corey?
I think he's on mute.
Or we lost him. That's always been a challenge, being on site.
He is on site today, I can tell you that.
Okay. Or maybe he got pulled away for an issue on site. Oh, he's on mute.
Sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, Corey, we can hear you.
Sorry about that. Yes, to answer your question, I am on site.
Awesome. And how are things going out there?
Very busy and very fast. That's kind of the typical course of construction, but like Amber mentioned, that the design is only to a certain point with the TI fit out, but they are digging trenches right now for our underground conduit feed equipment on the lowest floor, and they are planning on digging trenching out for other conduits in one of the higher grade areas for the project. So the construction is moving forward.
Nice. All right, so that being said, Amber, we touched on the project phases. And what about, how do you guys exchange information then? Without the typical sets of drawings that are changing hands, is there just constant communication? Are there weekly PDFs?
Well, between Corey and I, there's constant communication. We're instant messaging each other most days. For the project team, there is weekly PDFs that are posted showing the progression of design as we're moving forward. And the general contractor, Lise Crutcher-Lewis, has implemented a CDR process to help move forward on items that need immediate attention or hot, especially, like Corey said, stuff going into the dirt right now.
Oh, so Lowry, tell us about the CDR process, if you could.
Yeah. So the CDR process it stands for Collaborative Design Resolution, and this is kind of our alternative to a traditional RFI process. We actually kind of pioneered this with the UW several years back on a UW Bothell project, and essentially, it was us needing to get information back in a timely manner. And, the traditional RFI process, we kind of looked at it as almost throwing the issue over the fence and then, hoping that the design team will come up with a good solution and then throw it back. And it just seemed too iterative to do that. And we, quite frankly, on that job didn't have the time to go about it that way. And so the tools at the time were, Bluebeam Studio was just getting, more popularized and more familiar. And we had our subcontractors, unfortunately, and that's another point to this discussion, is that the subcontractor industry here in Seattle is very advanced and familiar with these tools as well. So we essentially, and again, we wanted to leverage the virtual design phase of a project. And so using the model primarily as a way to generate issues that come up in the building, we'd capture those in a PDF format, post them to Bluebeam Studio, and then we would have a weekly session wherein the design team would be there, the subcontractors actually would be there too, looking at the issue and us together. And so we're actually, we wanted to get all the key project stakeholders together to solve it more or less on the spot. And I think it's a faster way to get to the best value solution, if you will. And so we're able to get direction, we're able to vet it fairly quickly as well. So, we might say, okay, hey, let's move this wall over 6 inches, or let's do this. And we're able to quickly kind of get that back to our drafters and detailers to have them start in that direction, and then go ahead and test it and say, okay, yeah, that works, and let's go ahead down that path. So before it was, getting to, I think, almost too much of a resolution before it was fully baked. And so pushing towards collaboration, I think, especially in this environment, is something that really is necessary, because the speed of construction, I mean, that's kind of the funny thing with these tools like Revit and BIM and whatnot, it just helps accelerate what we're doing. So,
right.
Yeah,
I mean,
things happen faster.
Right. I mean, when I was at Lewis, I was involved in another project, and I was at every CDR meeting as well. And I found it being extremely beneficial for the entire team, because having everyone on the line and hearing about the issue would a lot of times kind of rope in other trades or other disciplines. And it's always nice to have everyone listening in, because then they can give input right there on the fly. So definitely an awesome process to sort of do away with that traditional RFI method and implement something that is more streamlined and happening on a weekly basis.
And I think just one more thing to add to that. I mean, the other function that I appreciated is we as a GC, and I think same thing with this IPD process, is that you get better buy-in, right? When there's an understanding of what the limitations are by everybody. So if you're sub or us as a self-performed subcontractor, when we actually can understand the limitations from the designer, not just telling us a yes or no, it's very helpful in A, receiving that information, and then B, having the opportunity to say, okay, this is a solution that I was a part of. And so, the execution of that, should be 100%, right? There's more ownership over that.
Absolutely. And Amber, what are your thoughts on the CDR process being on the design side? And then we'll also ask Corey his thoughts on that.
It's a definitely different process than what I'm used to, but I've liked it because I can see things that most of the time, for instance, would only go to the mechanical engineer or even the vertical transportation, so the elevator guys, and their issues have an impact on the electrical scope, but I don't find out about it until it appears in the model and there's a change, and then there's rolling effects, where in the CDR process now, I can also comment saying, whoa, time out. If you do this, it also has these impacts on the electrical scope. Have you thought of that? Or is there a different solution we can do?
Awesome. And Corey, on the electrical sub side, what are your thoughts?
It's definitely been an interesting learning experience. However, from where we started with it until now, there's great benefit to it because everyone's creating their individual CDRs and their Revit models, but all those Revit models are linked into ours. And LCL developed an element that everybody can follow along and see if this element is in here, this area is in question, but heads up, something's changed, possibly changing in this area. It allows Amber, like she said, to react to the PDF version of the CDR in Bluebeam Studio, and allows me to react in the modeling aspect of being able to see what is going to be changing, and that way we can provide an instantaneous solution should we see a challenge with it.
So you're saying there's an element directly in the Revit model?
They did develop one, yes, kind of like a 3D cloud element, just as an FYI, it hatches out in the plan view and says, hey, I might be changing here, so pay attention.
Interesting. All right. No, that was very good. And Amber, thank you for bringing up the CDR process, because that is also something that I think would help out a lot in this type of project delivery, where it's more real-time information and constant communication, even amongst other team members and other trades. Lowry, you mentioned Bluebeam. What was there any other software that was mandated by the teams to use as you were doing selecting the teams or developing the execution plans?
Yeah, primarily we realized that the best environment to accomplish our goal, or the best tool to get this done with, was C4R, collaboration for Revit. We also kind of had a host, and I think it's still the case where there's that elusive silver bullet, right? That's going to handle all your VDC communication, handle all your traditional design document, back and forth, and be an all-encompassing tool. And I think that's kind of the biggest challenge in this IPD environment, is what are the channels of communication, and how do we eliminate those redundancies? So, people, again, I think tend to gravitate towards the tools they're most familiar with. And so, and especially, there were some limitations somewhat because, we had to involve the owner as well, right? And all their, miscellaneous people being involved. And so Bluebeam really was a good solution that the broad spectrum of people is kind of lowest common denominator for many, many folks. And then there's a few tangential kind of tools that we use. Smartsheet was one big one for us in terms of, again, whatever it is, if it's Smartsheet, for those who don't know, is more like a online spreadsheet that you can, again, facilitate this idea of having multiple collaborators on to provide information. So we would see Smartsheets getting established in our commissioning meetings, any kind of thing where we had, whether it was commissioning or design, cistern or whatever was going on these side things, we really tried to unify as much of that as we can into a solid platform so that you could see, okay, what was going on. You didn't have to search in many different boxes to kind of find out what conversations are taking place. So it's kind of like you're trying to find a way to build that virtual big room, if you will.
Interesting, and I know that Revit in particular is somewhat new to the construction side. So Corey, can you tell me a little bit about Vecca's exposure to Revit, and maybe a little bit about how, if you guys have done a lot of projects, or is this your first project using Revit? Or I know you guys have worked on the UW project together, so just tell us a little bit about your experience and Vecca's experience with adopting Revit.
Well, originally it was troublesome and quite scary going from an AutoCAD MEP world to a Revit world for electrical. But about 5 years ago, we went ahead and went with it and struggled through all the challenges of adopting a different CUI, a different format for how we build our content. For myself, this would be I would say my 6th project full on in Revit, second one in a row working with Amber. And every time I have to open any type of an AutoCAD DWG file, I start grimacing and wishing I was in Revit again. So it took a little time to adapt to the Revit format, but now seeing the possibilities of just the enormous database of information you can build into your models, it's hard to go back to anything different. We've certainly worked with other add-on companies for hangars and for being able to split up our conduit runs for a fabrication process that I've worked on developing within the company over the past 6 years. And Revit and all of its add-ons and tools has really been able to help us streamline that entire effort. Though one of the challenges of having all this information in one model is construction side and field crews think we can move a lot faster. We still have to build our content. We still have to coordinate everything based on our schedules. We still need the time to develop shop drawings and all that. It does streamline our efforts, but it's not exactly an easy button. So, but it's been a great eye opener and definitely something that we don't plan on changing anytime soon.
Awesome. I've definitely seen a push from Autodesk to incorporate more construction-related tools in Revit, which is great because now it seems like what they're trying to do is not, historically it's been a design tool, but now it looks like they're leaning towards fabrication for, say, the mechanical side, and again, I think for the electrical side as well. So definitely that's awesome insight. And then Amber, I know that, again, like Revit has historically been a design tool. So can you tell us a little bit about how much, I know that when we were at AEI, you had actually implemented several workflows that actually pushed the Seattle office to the next level in terms of using Revit as a design tool. So how much of Revit are you using in design, like calculations and things like that? Can you share that with us?
Yeah. I pretty much use Revit for all my engineering now. I don't do much outside of Revit except for the odds and ends that are required for permit documents, usually just special code related sheets. I do all my circuiting, all my power density calculations. I've even created ways for it to size wires and conduits for myself and the motors and equipment in the Revit model. So as much as I can, I'm leveraging the tool to its highest capability that still meets all of the AEI standards and code requirements.
Awesome. And then Corey, you mentioned something about content as well. I'm curious about that because, with the integrated project delivery approach, you guys are sharing a model. So how do you guys decide who's building what content, or how do you guys, and maybe there's a question for both you and Amber, who's developing what, who owns what in the model? How did you guys split that up?
Very early on, when we were awarded the project and started discussing how we were going to approach this, Amber and I sat down while she was still here and went through exactly who was going to do what, who was going to take ownership of what elements at what time, and then we just split up the responsibilities day one. And then as a back check, as we go through building content, we're always communicating back and forth. Should this shift? Hey, I've got to touch this thing. Is it okay if I move this over? To make sure we're not stepping on each other's toes, knowing Amber really deals with the design elements, the load calculations, the circuiting, device placement. We shared electrical equipment layouts for a time, and then at a certain point, I took that over when we started gaining submittal information for the gear. Light fixtures, we are still sharing the elements for those, bouncing back and forth on who needs to deal with what. And then when it comes to the conduit routing, that's the subcontractor's bread and butter right there. So I said that day one, said, don't worry about any of that. I've got it.
Yeah, Corey's pretty much on point with how we did it. We really laid out a good groundwork right in the beginning and kind of gave rough ideas of when items would transition over from the design side to the construction side. And even now, we still have points where something needs to change, and it might be an AEI family that we started with, and Corey needs some way to modify it. So he'll just shoot me an instant message going, hey, can we do this? And will it impact what you're doing? And then I'll respond, or I'll make the fix and sync it back to the model, and then he can take it over from there.
And I think for us on the GC side, the challenge there is that you have a model that's always in flux, right? So how do you know what's good, right? I mean, we print sets at different iterations, and we can always fall back on those hard copies. So we were looking, to challenge the team in a broader sense to say, hey, how can we all collectively look at this thing and know what's good and what's not? And so early on as a team, we decided, hey, let's use some parameters in there, and we basically had 4 different phases that you can apply to essentially every element, and those phases more or less indicated where the areas of handoff would be between designer and subcontractor. Because with this single authored model, or this single source of truth model, it really becomes an issue of that co-authorship. And I think the MEP teams, specifically electrical, from what I've seen in the regionally here, the electrical teams probably do the best job of this co-authorship. And then we kind of follow their coattails. We're a self-performed contractor, so we were doing a similar process with KPFF, our structural engineer.
Right, and that's an interesting topic as well, with Lease Crutcher Lewis being a self-performed concrete contractor. I understand that you guys are now developing work packages for you guys in the field based on a shared model with the structural engineer as well. So it's a very similar process with who we're talking to here on the electrical side. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was good. I think, for us, we kind of looked at it and said, okay, we kind of use the analogy of Legos. We kind of said, okay, let's pour our Lego sets out on the floor and then see which ones you like, right? Like, do you want to use, because we have our own host of families, so if it could be something as simple as a footing or a column, we'd say, okay, well, you guys, KPFF, have developed your footing or column family. What are your uses? What are the pros and cons? What are the information that you need from it? And then we just kind of said, okay, which elements do we want to use from whose toolbox, and what elements can we quickly modify to get the key information that we as a subcontractor were looking for into that element, so that we can get it out of that element when we take the authorship back.
Right, and so that brings up another idea about standardized data within these pieces of content. So was there a challenge there between the construction and design teams? Because everyone, for those of our listeners that don't know, I mean, the Revit data set is extremely finicky. You can't exactly share parameters the way that it sounds like calling it a shared parameter. So I'm just curious about Did one team have to push and pull more than the other, or were you just combining efforts to build content that included everyone's required parameters?
That part was a challenge for sure. There was a lot of effort poured in, primarily from a few key members on our pre-construction side of things. So the biggest, I mean, the first hurdle we hit really was how are we doing the QTO? How are, you know, our traditional metrics that we're able to quickly get out? How are those showing up? And then how do we know that they're correct? And so there was a lot of work to get that right. I think, you know, what the solution we came up with, you know, was a good fix, but it's by no means kind of, you know, the solution we roll out with, you know, starting from, you know, doing this over again. And I think, you know, hopefully, I think, you know, Jay, when you were here, you were sharing a lot of ideas about, you know, how we can get more towards a standardization, you know, for parameter data. But I think, you know, it's either going to have to come that way, or, you know, if we start doing more IPD work and the environment continues to push that way, which I believe it will, you know, it's about establishing, you know, a tool that can work, a set of Legos that is pretty pliable, right? Or at least the information that you need out of that, you can either, you know, set up to be more flexible, not hard baked into the Revit families.
Right. And Amber and Corey, for this project in particular, how did you guys handle some of those challenges with standardizing data between you two?
I think in electrical, it's a little easier because you have your standard parameters that don't really change that I need for the circuiting purposes and the load calculations. And then Corey has his standards, which there wasn't much overlap between our parameters. So it's just, there's a lot of parameters in our model. There's a ton of information in our model now. I mean, it is a wealth of knowledge that anyone can pull information from. And so without having to reduplicate the parameters, it was pretty seamless. We just made sure each family had what we needed, or we developed ways of me putting in a special family that had the content I needed. So then Corey could really model, for instance, the light fixtures to look exactly like what's going to be installed and how it's going to be hung from the ceiling or put into a grid ceiling.
And like Amber mentioned, making sure that we're not crossing up parameter needs or anything like that. We have a lot of our own individual parameters we put in for conduit runs, and like she mentioned, the light fixtures. So really it was just that open communication up front of who needs what in what element, and making sure that we hold to that. And I would say that we have been extremely successful in doing so. There's really no duplication of effort between us on any part of this project so far, and it's just flowing seamlessly at this point. And the information we have built in here is easily shared out to all the other subcontractors, to the GC, all the way up to the owner as well.
I think one more thing, Jay, too, you know, for us as a GC, you know, we were looking at the building holistically, right? We knew that we would have certain subs on board, you know, early, which is great, but there's a whole, you know, host of information that we wouldn't have subs on board for until later. Like, you know, CMU is always a good example. You know, most of the CMU walls are getting drawn or developed by the architect. And so, you know, we said, you know, there's a couple basic things which, you know, we said, hey, if you can meet these minimum parameters, and not just data-wise, but just actually how you go about modeling it, then we can either, you know, we'll have more options when we get a subcontractor on board. So CMU, for example, you know, if it's a 8-inch CMU block, we're saying, hey, use the, you know, make it 7 5/8 so that we can actually locate it where it's supposed to be when you're drawing it, you know, and it's supposed to be held down an inch from the underside slab, like actually model it that way. And then the concept was, at that point, we would have a good foundation to either say to our subcontractor, okay, we got this we got this model developed for you, CMU contractor. You can now, inherit this, or, you can use it in a different way to maybe add on your own content, right? If they're placing sleeves or figuring out whatever they're figuring out. And a lot of times, for this stuff, it falls into the category of what we call gap modeling, which essentially, most oftentimes is us as a GC kind of filling in the miscellaneous things, whether they're toilet partitions or messy steel for, a lot of different elements. We kind of inevitably are the ones that have to figure that stuff out and get it represented in the model.
Awesome. Well, that's great insight there. So talking more about the technology again, have there been any technical issues, like let's say downtime with hosting models in the cloud? I know that I have heard grumblings, not necessarily this project, but with C4R or BIM 360 going down. Have you guys lost any time or had any issues with that type of technological downtime?
It's happened. C4R has gone down a couple times. Autodesk sends out emails that tells you the health is degraded and you might just want to pause. And so I know, at least on my end, I'm signed up to receive all those emails. And if I see it go down and I know others are working in the project, I'll shoot out a quick email saying, hey, it's down. You might want to pause and wait until it comes back online and then sync your work. And so when it does happen, you just have to work on something else until it comes back online. And then you just sync and it's seamless once it comes back online.
Mm-hmm. And Corey, being on site, I know that connectivity can be an issue at times as well. What about you?
So far, pretty much the same story as with Amber. I get the notification from Autodesk when they're having some degraded issues with BIM 360, A360, whichever you like to call it. And then it's just kind of redirecting my efforts to something else until I get notification that it's back up and running. The network connection that we have out here is pretty stable. So I work from here, from home, from the office, all accessing one model. And if 10, 15, 20 minutes of downtime sporadically is the trade-off for it, I'd take it any day.
That makes sense, definitely. Awesome. So as we start to close up the interview, before we move into the Q&A, just wanted to open it up to Lowry, Amber, and Corey. Just any other feedback on the workflows, how they've been affected, or any advice on how to approach this type of the IPD process. So I guess start with Lowry. If you have any general feedback, we welcome it.
Yeah, I think, hopefully, we'll see what the end result of this is. We're still early on, but I know our approach, and my kind of approach to this project was that we wanted accountability, and we wanted, not to regress to the mean in terms of, that's kind of everything I've seen, in my experience has been, hey, we start out with these great goals, let's do all this stuff, and then you kind of hit the first bump or two, and then everybody just kind of shelters in, holds on tighter to their information or their processes, and, and you get kind of stuck. And so, we made a good effort, and I think, this starts from, you got to have a progressive owner who is willing to see the value in, getting the right people to the board. You have to have the right subs as well who are going to say, yeah, I know it's early in design, but I'm going to give you my, my detailer, the boots on the ground guy, because that's the guy that we want in the room early up, And so I think there's those challenges surrounding, the broader picture. And then really then it just becomes, team building and good communication. So, our role as a GC, when we had from day one, we had BDC meetings with our, drafters for a lot of these scopes, and, continually just checking in and say, hey, what's this process look like? Is this working for us? Is this not? We kind of made the commitment that we don't want to be slave to the process. And so, and that comes with, its pros and cons and exchanges. And I think the hardest part for us, I think is overall is, it's a double-edged sword. You get great information exchange and flow of information, but that also means that, that you're saving hopefully the owner money, which is good, but then they're also reinvesting that money by way of changes. And like Corey said, it's hard. It's hard when, things are constantly moving and changing, and, but that's kind of the way things are. So you gotta just go with it.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Lowry. Amber?
Kind of going off with what Lowry said, you have to be open-minded with this process. You have to adapt because, at least on my side of things, I was so used to I'm delivering a 2D document. I'm delivering the permit documents to the reviewers, and then that's what goes to the contractor. And then you get into these processes where now you really need to be aware of how everything's impacting all the other disciplines, all the other subcontractors and trades, and even like Lowry said, how the owner is reinvesting the money saved back into the project. So you need to be really fluid in your workflow. You need to have this open, transparent communication between the teams to ensure knowledge isn't lost and everyone's on the same page as you're moving forward. And then you just need to have the trust of the other people in your model. And I think that's been the big item is before in traditional design, we might turn over our models to the contractors, but it was a separate model. Like we physically emailed them the model and then they had it on their network, but now we're in the same model. And so you have to build that trust with your contractor to know they're going to check in with you when they're doing something, and then you also need to check in with them to make sure it doesn't impact their construction drawings that are going to the field, or what they're doing doesn't impact my design documents that are going to the city for permit review. So it's been a challenge, but it's been a good challenge, and I think it's been a very efficient process so far. And I've enjoyed working with Corey in the same model because we're getting real-time answers and not having the delay of me drafting it, sending it to the contractor, and then the contractor sending it back, asking to make some other changes down the road.
Right. Thanks, Amber. Corey, any feedback there?
Yeah, I'll kind of just keep right on going with what Amber was just mentioning about the time that these decisions are being made in, and they're almost instantaneous. Amber and myself being able to review model elements, certain design challenges in the same model at the same time. We're not waiting to draft a possible solution, send it over the email, wait for the other one to see if it actually does work. We're gaining time back that one project via a typical process would be losing if you think about it that way. So we're increasing our productivity time. We're shedding the wasted hours of asking questions and waiting for responses. And we're even going to the extent of having the architect and owner and the other trades accessible. I mean, out here on site, they implemented one building with everyone in it. There's no longer kind of siloed trailers for electrical. The mechanical has their little trailers. You'd have to get up and walk 100, 200 feet to this trailer just to ask a question. You stand up, you look at the person, you stare at them right in the eye and ask the question. And then they know you're waiting for an answer because you're still staring at them, which is actually a great benefit because they understand the urgency at that point. Decisions are made much faster.
Awesome. Yeah, makes total sense. Well, thanks guys for that. We're going to go ahead and move into the Q&A. So hopefully we have enough time here, but I'm going to hand the floor back over to Laura and we'll get some of these questions answered.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you so much to our guests, Lowry, Amber, and Corey, for sharing your wonderful insight. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, please use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your Zoom window to submit any questions or comments you may have. These can be directly related to the presentation or about integrated project delivery in general. You're also welcome to post questions to the entire panel and host or to one of these members individually. It looks like we have a few in line, so let's go ahead and get started. How does this work contract-wise? Hashing out goals and boundlessness is great and ideal for most of us CAD and BIM folks across the industry talking with each other. But when it hits construction and changes, who implements what level of detail within each level of the model at deliverables? Is this all hashed out in the initial contract and fine detail?
That one might be one for Lowry, I think. Did you get that question, Lowry?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think.
Trying to process it.
Yeah. Well, it is. I think there was like a text or something that was asking about the BIM execution plan as well. I think it's a little different in the sense that, first of all, contractually, we had several what we call risk reward partners. So, there's a pool of savings, if you will, or goals to be met for incentives. And so we all kind of draw out of that. So it's kind of like you can't let, your partner fall. So every problem becomes everyone's problem. So that was interesting. And I don't have a ton of insight into that side of it from a bigger project perspective. I will say, though, that, from a BIM, LOD, and handoff, we really kind of had to throw that out the window to a certain degree. And like I said, what we did was to say, okay, initially, we know what the end result is. And actually, we got good feedback from our architects, I know in particular, and our structural engineers, is that they're saying, okay, yeah, this is great. Like, what I'm drawing isn't, they knew who their customer was, right? The customer is not the owner so much as it's now the contractor. And so when they're developing things, when they're drawing or modeling elements, they're like, this is for contractor use. And so those were the kind of things that, say an LOD standard doesn't hit. So we kind of had to address those things early on. So it could be something as simple as, hey, when we come and form this core wall in this particular area, what is going on? Is the slab tying into the side of the wall? Is the slab capping the wall? How are you, contractor, going to pour this? Similar to what I was talking about, the CMU wall, about holding it down an inch and doing these other things, which, interestingly enough, and this is why I don't think LOD is a good way to do it, because by the letter of the law, the LOD, 350 should make sure that that CMU wall is drawn exactly the size, that it's held down an inch, whatever. But that's not the practice, right? I mean, every structural engineer model we've ever received, those columns run floor to ceiling, from building top all the way down to building bottom. They don't break at the slabs. They don't, do the things that we as contractors, self-performed concrete contractors, have to come in and remodel, right? So, you could say, is that the owner's responsibility? Because, obviously we don't have, in traditional ways, we don't have contracts with the design team directly. And so, this term, the IPD, the design team was under our contracted to us. And so there's a lot more, it's easier to kind of direct some of those things, right? At least it perks people's ears to say, hey, we're not just going to go back to our room and do it our way because it's quicker.
Right. And Amber and Corey, you guys touched on a way that you guys were approaching that as well, like sort of who's implementing what at what level of detail. Do you guys want to kind of reiterate that one for the answer?
Yeah, I think in this case, I had families I needed to use in the model that had a certain level of detail already developed into them. It's kind of more on the design side. And then from there, Corey would modify them as he needed to reach the contract construction document level of detail. So panels, he's been getting submittals in, so he's taken the gear and started changing the dimensions and figuring out the sections and where the conduits will land into the gear. whereas I just need the circuiting information out of those. And so, like Lowry touched on, the contractor, Becca and AEI, are under one contract. We're on the same contract together. And so the lines are kind of blurred of who gets the level of detail in. Obviously, Corey takes it much further than I do in terms of I'm just doing design and he's putting in actual hangars and stuff. But in the end, it's all one model, one scope, and one contract for the two of us.
Awesome.
Okay, let's go. Thank you for that. Let's go ahead and get to the next question. What was the owner's role, the university in this case, in the process? Did they have a system-wide BIM XP in place, or did you help them develop these standards?
So I enjoy working, first of all, I enjoy working with any, any owner who's going to occupy the building. I think that makes a huge difference in terms of them really understanding and taking a level of involvement that is required, especially when you're going to do something like this that is requires a lot of information exchange. The UW, I would say, and this is probably typical of most owners, is that, they have a BIM execution plan, but, nobody really knows what it is. And it's, they're always looking to kind of evolve it, if you will. And that's a whole topic to itself, is kind of what is the BIM execution plan, right? For us, it means something different. To the owner, it's a document to accomplish something different. And to the subs, it just checks various boxes for different people. So, I kind of have my own issues about BIM execution plans, but they did not have one per se. They were really interested in, capturing how to do this. I mean, they want to replicate this process, right? And so, the BIM execution plan, while it has, thou shalt do this and, use button A, B, C, D, it really almost is more of a narrative that they're looking for now. And like I said, the challenge in that environment is that the tools constantly change. We could write a whole thing and say, oh, use Bluebeam Studio, do this process. But, by the end of the project, I'm sure we're going to have a better solution or a better tool to do it, right? And so I think that's where it goes, is you're trying to capture more the essence of what you're trying to accomplish, not necessarily, the how-tos. And I think, yeah. Well, I was just going to add, I think it really depends on the owner. Like the owner needs to have a good idea of what's going on and what's available. So the UW, I think to their credit, they did have a good understanding of past experiences, past projects, drawing on other universities as well to see, they do a lot of going and learning about how things work. And I think that's probably the best approach, is to just continue to have a good level of education and continue to maintain that and again, be flexible.
Thank you for that. And that same user asked, what was the actual contract deliverable? Hard copy drawings? What did the prime agreements between parties and the owner say about model deliverables and reliance on that digital data?
I mean, in the end, we're still delivering 2D documents. The UW doesn't have a way to really open Revit models, but they still also want the 3D model. They all have access to our A360 site. They can view the published models at any time off that website and look at the 3D, and they've been very interested and involved with trying to see ways they can leverage data out of the models in the long run, but they're not to that point. So in the end, we're delivering the standard 2D documents of drawings and specs, but we're also turning over the 3D models to the university.
Thank you. And our next question is, I hear about the benefits of IPD everywhere, but what would each of you say is the biggest drawback of using IPD? So maybe let's get each of your perspectives on that, or if you don't have
No
one,
comment.
yeah, that's totally fine. Would anyone like to start off if they had to pick the greatest drawback of using this project delivery model?
I think. Go ahead, Corey.
I was going to say I don't know if it's a downside. It's more of just a challenge that we're working to overcome. And I mentioned it earlier, but from the contracting side, the IPD process, deliverable method, it's speedy. There's instantaneous answers to questions. So the line between design and construction is being blurred through this IPD process, which also translates to construction out there in the field speeding up, going a little bit faster because they can get instant questions and they can get those schedules moving to the left, if you will. So I think the challenge is just being able to navigate how quickly design and MEP modeling can be done to match up to these ever shrinking construction schedules. The process in and of itself is fantastic. It takes a lot of team members to, as Amber mentioned earlier, have open minds and be transparent, be communicative, and you can overcome the challenge of a very speedy construction schedule. But it is always going to be that looming challenge for everyone, because owners, they want their buildings and they want to find processes that help them get their buildings faster. So that is just not a downside, but it does put a few more gray hairs on my head during each project that I do.
I think, my point was similar to Corey's. Even though we are in control of the schedule, I know from a BDC and detailing perspective, we also, feel that pressure when decisions are being made. And so, we worked really hard. And I think the key to success, and this is, again, also the drawback, is you really have to limit decision makers. You really have to. I mean, it'd be awesome if there was, one king for the project, right? Who said, you will do this or we're not going to do that. And, I think, when you're working with the owner, and we have a higher level of management, which is attempts to do that, to say, okay, these are all the factors, here we're at schedule wise, here we're at cost wise. And even though we could get this done, it's not the right thing to do schedule-wise, so we're not going to do it at this time, right? And so those are, you're going to get to those hard decisions, and it's a hard balance because of the relationships between, all parties, So you got to have a good leadership at the top and people that can make decisions in a timely manner. And if you don't, it's going to be a disaster.
And just echoing Lowry and Corey, the speed and the decisions is the biggest drawback of these styles of projects, because the speed and the decisions need to be made so immediately that you are sometimes making a decision, like, for instance, a big one of the final service size of the electrical system before you have anything fully designed. So you're making decisions really early on and hoping that everyone stays true to the basis of designs and nothing will impact it so greatly that you're going to have this big change down the road that would impact a lot. It works as long as all the bigger decisions are made in advance and everyone agrees to it. But as you know, in the construction industry and with owners, things change all the time, and you might be coming back and looking at it going, why did we make that decision when we did, and wondering if the speed has really actually had a negative impact on the project.
Thank you so much, Corey, Amber, and Lowry, for your honest feedback on that question. And it looks like we're nearing the end of the hour, so we will go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you so much to our audience for engaging with us and asking questions. and of course to our host and panelists for providing valuable insight in your experience using IPD. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us today. We will be sending out a recording to this webinar later on for you to reference and to share with others who may be interested. And with that, we will also include a link to a survey for your feedback. We want to ensure these webinars are worth your time and that we are covering topics that you find relevant and useful. So we would sincerely appreciate if you took a few minutes to fill out that survey to let us know how we're doing. Again, a huge thank you to Lowry, Amber, and Corey for joining us today and sharing their insight. We sincerely appreciate everyone's time and hope this was a good webinar for you to join and worthwhile. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
All right, thanks guys, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.